The terminal was loud and rushed, with rolling suitcases cutting through the air like waves. Lena moved slowly near the seating area, trying to calm her thoughts while waiting for her connection. She was tired in a way sleep could not fix. Every dollar mattered right now, every decision felt heavy, and she just wanted to get through the day without breaking down. That was when she noticed the older woman sitting alone, gripping her purse as if it were the only steady thing in the room. Her eyes kept scanning the crowd, confused and a little afraid. People passed by without looking twice. Lena tried to ignore it at first. She told herself it wasn't her problem. She had enough of her own. But something about the woman's hands shaking made her stop. She walked over and spoke gently. The woman looked up with clear relief, as if someone had finally seen her. She explained that she couldn't find her group, that her phone battery was dead, and that the airport felt too big all of a sudden. Lena listened without interrupting. She sat beside her, not checking the time, not acting rushed. She offered to help find an information desk and stayed close while they walked slowly through the crowd. They waited in line together. Lena answered questions, repeated things calmly when the woman forgot, and never once showed frustration. When the woman apologized for being a bother, Lena shook her head and said she wasn't. She meant it. Some people just need someone to stand with them for a moment. She remembered what it felt like to be left behind. While they waited, the woman talked about her late husband, about how travel used to excite her, and how lately she felt invisible. Lena listened. She didn't rush the story or try to fix it. She just listened. When the woman's stomach growled, Lena quietly bought her a tea and a sandwich, even though she knew she should save the money. It felt wrong not to. Across the terminal, a man had stopped walking. He was watching from a distance, unnoticed. He saw how the young woman leaned in to hear better, how she smiled without forcing it, how she never once checked to see who might be watching. He was used to people performing kindness. This didn't look like that. When help finally arrived, the older woman squeezed Lena's hand with surprising strength. Her eyes were wet. She asked for her number, but Lena gently declined. She said she was just glad she could help. No favors. No expectations. Lena stood up, adjusted her bag, and walked away into the moving crowd, unaware that her simple choice had been witnessed. She didn't know that this moment, born out of quiet compassion, was about to open a door she never planned to walk through. All she knew was that she had done the right thing, and for the first time in a long while, that felt like enough. Lena had not always lived with this tight feeling in her chest. There was a time when she believed her life was steady and moving forward. For 6 years, she shared her days with Daniel, trusting him with her future and her fears. They talked about plans, about building something together, and she believed every word. She gave him her time, her loyalty, and her savings, thinking they were a team. The betrayal did not come all at once. It arrived quietly, hidden behind excuses and half-truths. Daniel began making decisions without her, using money she had earned and saved, telling her it was temporary and for their future. She wanted to believe him, so she did. Love made her patient, even when her instincts told her something was wrong. By the time the truth came out, the damage was already done. She discovered he had been lying for months. The money was gone, the promises empty. Worse than that, he had been emotionally pulling away, treating her like an obstacle instead of a partner. When she confronted him, he didn't apologize. He blamed her for trusting him too much, for asking questions, for expecting honesty. That moment broke something inside her. Leaving was not dramatic. There were no screaming matches or slammed doors. She packed what little she could carry and walked away with her pride bruised but intact. The life she thought she was building disappeared overnight. She moved into a smaller place, took extra work, and learned how to stretch every dollar. Some nights, the loneliness felt heavier than the betrayal itself. Still, Lena refused to let bitterness take over. She did not talk badly about Daniel to others or look for sympathy. She carried the pain quietly, choosing to heal in her own way. Every day became about survival and self-respect. She focused on getting through 1 hour at a time, then one day. She reminded herself that losing everything did not mean she was nothing. The hardest part was trusting herself again. She replayed moments in her head, wondering how she missed the signs, questioning her own judgment. But even in that doubt, she held on to one truth: she had loved honestly. The wrong choice was not loving, it was staying too long after the truth showed itself. That pain shaped her, but it did not harden her. She still noticed people who were hurting. She still believed small acts mattered. Life had taken much from her, but it had not taken her ability to care. That quiet strength, built through loss and endurance, stayed with her wherever she went, even when no one else could see it. While they waited, the older woman began to speak more freely, as if the silence around them made room for honesty. She lowered her voice and shared that this trip had not gone the way she hoped. Her daughter-in-law had planned everything but treated her like extra baggage. Her grandson stayed glued to his phone, barely speaking to her unless he needed something. Most of the time, she felt like she was in the way. Margaret admitted that she had been left behind more than once during the trip. No one waited to make sure she was okay. When she asked questions, they sighed or rolled their eyes. By the time they reached the airport, she felt so overwhelmed that she sat down, thinking someone would come back for her. No one did. Saying it out loud made her voice shake, and she quickly apologized for complaining. Lena shook her head and told her she had nothing to apologize for. She said it was hard to feel invisible, especially around people who were supposed to care. She didn't rush the conversation or try to change the subject. She stayed present, giving her full attention. For Margaret, that alone felt like a gift. As time passed, Lena noticed Margaret rubbing her hands together. She asked if she was hungry. Margaret hesitated, clearly uncomfortable admitting it. Lena stood up and said she would be right back. She returned with a warm tea and something small to eat, placing them gently in front of her. Margaret looked at the cup as if it were something precious. She tried to hand Lena some money, insisting she couldn't accept help for free. Lena refused softly and told her not to worry about it. She said she would have done the same for her own grandmother. The words came naturally, without effort or performance. Margaret's eyes filled with tears, not from sadness this time, but from relief. They talked about small things after that. Favorite places, old memories, moments that still made Margaret smile. Time passed unnoticed. Lena stayed even though she knew she should be moving on, even though the clock mattered. She chose to stay because leaving felt wrong. Margaret reached over and held Lena's hand, her grip warm and steady. She said it had been a long time since someone treated her with such kindness, without wanting anything in return. Lena smiled, a little embarrassed, and said it was nothing. But for Margaret, it was everything. When help finally came, Margaret looked back more than once, as if afraid the moment would disappear. The kindness she received that day stayed with her, quietly settling into her heart, waiting to reveal its importance. Evan stood a short distance away, pretending to read messages on his phone while keeping his attention fixed on the scene nearby. Years of success had trained him to observe people carefully. He had learned the hard way that kindness often came with expectations, and help was rarely free. He had seen it in business, in friendships, and even in extended family. Money changed how people behaved, especially when they thought no one important was watching. At first, he assumed the young woman would help briefly and then move on. When she stayed, he waited for the moment she would mention money or recognition. It never came. Instead, he noticed how natural her actions were. There was no exaggeration in her voice, no impatience in her body language. She seemed fully present, as if nothing else mattered in that moment. What surprised him most was her refusal. When his mother tried to offer payment, Evan expected the polite pause before acceptance. He had seen that pause many times before. But the woman declined without hesitation, as if the idea itself felt uncomfortable. There was no pride in it, no performance. She simply did not want anything in return. Evan felt a quiet shift inside himself. He realized how rarely he saw that kind of behavior anymore. Most people recognized him quickly or sensed opportunity. They asked questions designed to impress or create advantage. This woman did neither. When she walked away, blending back into the crowd without looking back, Evan felt something he had not felt in a long time, curiosity without suspicion. He watched her leave, noting how she carried herself. Tired, but steady. Careful, but not closed off. She moved like someone who had learned to be strong without becoming hard. Evan knew that look well. It was the look of someone who had been hurt and survived. He turned to his assistant and spoke quietly. He did not ask for favors or shortcuts. He simply asked for information. A name. A background. Nothing invasive. Just enough to understand who she was. He wanted to know if what he had seen was real, or if it was another well-played act. As he waited, Evan reflected on how his world had become predictable. People wanted access, influence, or protection. Very few wanted nothing at all. That was what made this moment stay with him. It challenged his assumptions and reminded him of a time before wealth complicated every interaction. When his assistant returned later with basic details, Evan listened carefully. The pieces did not form a polished image. There were no connections to chase, no obvious motives. Instead, the information painted a picture of someone quietly rebuilding, staying out of the spotlight, and minding her own life. Evan put his phone away and looked around the terminal again. The woman was gone, but the impression she left remained. He did not know yet why this moment mattered, only that it did. And for the first time in a long while, he trusted that instinct. The name stayed in Evan's mind longer than he expected. Out of habit, he reviewed recent files connected to his business partnerships, looking for anything familiar. That was when he saw it. Daniel Price. The connection was small at first, easy to miss, but once Evan noticed it, he couldn't ignore it. The same man was listed as a key partner in a project his company had recently approved. Evan felt a tight pull in his chest. He had trusted Daniel based on polished presentations and confident promises. Everything about him had seemed calculated but professional. Evan had seen that type before and usually kept his distance, but this deal had looked solid on paper. Now, doubt crept in. He ordered a deeper review, careful not to raise suspicion. What came back unsettled him. Daniel's past was not as clean as he claimed. There were patterns that repeated themselves. Short-term partnerships that ended suddenly. Women who had been closely involved in his projects but never publicly credited. Financial arrangements that benefited him while leaving others exposed. The more Evan read, the clearer the picture became. Daniel was skilled at gaining trust quickly, especially from people who believed in collaboration. He used charm and urgency to move things forward before questions could be asked. When problems surfaced, he shifted blame and walked away untouched. It was not illegal in the obvious sense, but it was deeply unethical. What disturbed Evan most was how personal it suddenly felt. This was no longer just about business risk. He now understood that the woman at the airport was not an exception in Daniel's life. She was part of a pattern. Someone who had given time, effort, and trust, only to be left behind when she was no longer useful. Evan reviewed contracts more closely and noticed how much control Daniel had quietly secured. Clauses favored him heavily, leaving others responsible for the fallout. It was clever, but not invisible to someone looking closely. Evan realized that if he had not paid attention now, the cost would have been far greater later. The betrayal unfolded slowly, each detail confirming the last. Daniel had not just misled individuals, he had built his progress on manipulation. Evan felt a rare mix of anger and clarity. He disliked being played, but he disliked even more the idea that someone like Daniel could continue unchecked. He leaned back and stared at the documents, thinking about how easily this could have been overlooked. One chance meeting had pulled a thread, and now the whole fabric was coming apart. Evan understood that this situation required patience, not confrontation. Rash moves would only alert Daniel. For now, Evan said nothing. He kept his tone neutral in meetings, his responses measured. but inside, a decision had already been made. Whatever steps came next would be deliberate and final. Daniel's actions had crossed too many lines, and the truth was no longer something Evan could ignore. Evan contacted Lena a few days later with a simple message. He thanked her again for helping his mother and asked if she would be willing to meet for coffee. He kept the tone polite and casual, making it clear there was no pressure. Lena hesitated before agreeing. She had learned to be careful, especially with people who carried confidence and resources she did not have. Their first meeting was brief. Evan did most of the listening, asking gentle questions and giving her space to answer in her own time. He didn't pry into her life or offer advice. He spoke mostly about his mother and how much that day had meant to her. That sincerity eased Lena's nerves a little, but she stayed guarded. They met again, then again. Each time, the conversation grew easier. Evan never rushed her or tried to impress her. He showed up on time, kept his word, and respected her boundaries. For Lena, that consistency mattered more than grand gestures. Slowly, she began to trust that he wasn't looking to take something from her. Eventually, the topic of Daniel came up naturally. Lena paused before speaking, choosing her words carefully. She didn't want pity or sympathy. She simply told the truth. She explained how she had trusted him, how her savings disappeared under promises of shared goals, and how every concern she raised was turned back on her. He made her doubt her memory, her judgment, and even her worth. She described the moment she realized she had been replaced. Not with love, but with convenience. Someone who asked fewer questions and expected less honesty. That realization hurt more than the money. It made her feel disposable, as if her loyalty had been a weakness instead of a strength. Evan listened without interrupting. He didn't react with shock or anger. He let her speak until she was finished, until the weight of the words had been released. He could hear how carefully she spoke, how she avoided bitterness even when the story deserved it. When she finished, Lena said something that stayed with him. She said she didn't want revenge. She didn't want apologies or public justice. She just wanted peace. She wanted to feel steady again, to trust herself, and to move forward without carrying the past everywhere she went. That was when Evan understood how deeply the lines crossed. What he was seeing in business was the same behavior she had lived through personally. Different settings, same pattern. The realization made everything sharper and more serious. He thanked Lena for trusting him with something so personal. He didn't promise anything or hint at what he knew. He simply told her that her honesty mattered and that she deserved better than what she had been given. For Lena, that acknowledgement felt grounding. For Evan, it confirmed that this was no longer just a professional issue, it was a matter of integrity. Evan moved carefully, knowing that acting too fast would only protect the wrong person. He did not confront anyone or share his concerns. Instead, he reviewed documents line by line, tracing timelines and comparing versions of agreements. What he found confirmed what his instincts had already warned him about. There were numbers that did not add up. Funds had been redirected through layered accounts, disguised as operational costs. On paper, everything looked clean, but the pattern repeated too often to be coincidence. Evan brought in specialists who knew how to look without leaving footprints. Each review revealed another small break in the story Daniel had told. Contracts showed signs of quiet manipulation. Key clauses were changed late in the process, often after others had already signed. Those changes shifted risk away from Daniel and onto his partners. It was done subtly, hidden behind technical language most people wouldn't question. Daniel relied on speed and trust to keep anyone from slowing down enough to notice. Then came the work itself. Evan reviewed project materials and drafts, comparing them with earlier versions. That was when he saw it clearly. Ideas had been lifted from prior collaborations and presented as original. Some of the earliest concepts matched notes and outlines Lena had described in conversation. She had contributed without pay, believing they were building something together. Daniel had taken that work and erased her from the story. The discovery settled heavily on Evan. This was no misunderstanding or poor judgment. It was deliberate. Daniel had built his progress by taking credit for what others created, then discarding them when they no longer served his purpose. The emotional damage he caused was mirrored by the professional harm he left behind. Evan organized everything into clear records. Dates. Files. Financial trails. Nothing exaggerated, nothing assumed. Only facts. He understood that truth carried more weight when presented calmly and completely. Anger had no place here. Precision did. He considered the people affected. Not just himself, but those who had trusted Daniel and paid the price quietly. Lena was one of them, but not the only one. The scale of the damage made Evan even more certain of what needed to be done. He began preparing the response. Legal steps were outlined carefully. Partnerships were reviewed. Exit strategies were planned without alerting Daniel to what was coming. Evan knew that when the truth surfaced, it had to stand on its own, without emotion or noise. This was not about humiliation or public scenes. It was about accountability. Daniel's success rested on deception, and that foundation was already cracking. Evan intended to let the truth do the work, slowly and completely, until there was nowhere left for Daniel to hide. Everything moved forward without noise. Evan did not warn Daniel or hint that anything was wrong. Meetings continued as usual, emails stayed polite, and timelines remained unchanged on the surface. Behind that calm appearance, decisions were being finalized. Funding was redirected, approvals were paused, and safeguards were put in place. When the time was right, Evan acted. The withdrawal of support was clean and documented, based on contract terms Daniel himself had insisted on. There was no room for argument. At the same time, formal reports were submitted through proper legal channels. Every claim was backed by records, dates, and clear evidence. No opinions. No assumptions. Just facts. The impact spread quickly. Projects stalled. Partners began asking questions. Once the details were reviewed, confidence in Daniel collapsed. Doors that had once been open without hesitation were suddenly closed. Calls went unanswered. Meetings were cancelled. The image Daniel had worked so hard to build started to fade, piece by piece. There was no public spectacle. No shouting. No dramatic accusations. That was what made it effective. The truth did not need help. It spoke clearly on its own. People who once defended Daniel quietly stepped back to protect themselves. Trust, once broken, did not return. Lena learned about the changes slowly. Evan did not frame it as a victory or revenge. He told her only what she needed to know. That the work she contributed had been recognized. That the lies had been uncovered. That the situation was being handled properly. She listened without interrupting, feeling a strange mix of relief and disbelief. She did not feel joy at Daniel's downfall. There was no satisfaction in watching someone lose everything, even if he deserved it. What she felt instead was release. The constant weight she had carried began to lift. The questions she had asked herself late at night finally had answers. She had not imagined the betrayal. She had not failed. From a distance, Lena watched her life settle into a steadier rhythm. She focused on her work, her healing, and the quiet rebuilding she had already started. Knowing the truth had come out allowed her to breathe more freely. The past no longer felt like an open wound. For Evan, the outcome confirmed something important. Accountability did not require cruelty. Justice did not need an audience. When handled with care and patience, the right actions led to real consequences. And for those who had been wronged, that was more than enough. Life did not change overnight, but it began to feel lighter. Evan approached Lena with an offer that was clear and respectful. There were no vague promises or rushed expectations. Everything was written down, explained, and open for discussion. The work matched her skills, and the pay reflected her effort. For the first time in a long while, Lena felt secure knowing exactly where she stood. What mattered even more than the opportunity was how she was treated. Her ideas were listened to. Her time was respected. When she asked questions, she received honest answers instead of irritation. There was no pressure to prove herself or be grateful beyond doing her job well. That sense of fairness helped rebuild something fragile inside her. Slowly, Lena began to trust her abilities again. She noticed how confident she felt speaking up, how natural it was to contribute without fear of being dismissed. The work challenged her in a healthy way, pushing her forward instead of draining her. Each completed task became a small reminder that she was capable and deserving. Margaret remained part of her life in a quiet, steady way. They met for meals, shared stories, and checked in on each other often. There were no expectations placed on Lena, no demands for time or attention. Margaret offered support the way family should, with warmth and patience. She listened without judgment and celebrated Lena's progress in simple, genuine ways. Those moments filled a space Lena hadn't realized was empty. She felt accepted without needing to explain her past or justify her choices. Being around someone who cared without conditions helped her relax and be herself again. It reminded her that connection did not have to come with risk. Healing came in small steps. Some days were easier than others. There were moments when old doubts tried to resurface, but they no longer controlled her. She learned to pause, breathe, and move forward anyway. She allowed herself to rest without guilt and to feel proud without fear. Lena did not change who she was to succeed. She did not harden her heart or close herself off. She remained kind, thoughtful, and careful with trust, but she no longer blamed herself for the past. She understood now that survival did not mean losing softness, it meant protecting it wisely. Looking back, she saw how far she had come. Not through revenge or bitterness, but through endurance and honesty. She had kept her values even when it would have been easier to abandon them. That, more than anything else, felt like a victory. Her life moved forward with purpose and balance. The pain no longer defined her. It became part of her story, one that shaped her strength without taking away her light. And for the first time in years, Lena felt grounded in a future she believed in. Lena often thought back to that day at the airport. A small choice, made almost without thinking, had set everything into motion. Helping someone in need, giving her time and attention without expecting anything in return, had brought her into the orbit of people who valued honesty and integrity. It was remarkable to realize how one simple act could ripple outward and change the course of a life. She remembered feeling tired and worn down that morning, unsure if she had the energy to care for anyone else. Yet, when she saw Margaret struggling, something inside her refused to look away. It was not heroism, not a calculated move, just a quiet decision to act with decency. And that decision had changed everything, including her own understanding of strength. The betrayal she had endured from Daniel Price no longer felt like a mark of failure. They were lessons in disguise, painful but instructive. Lena realized that people who take advantage will always exist, but how she responded to them defined her far more than what they had done. Choosing integrity, even when it cost her, had drawn the right kind of people into her life. That was a kind of victory she had never expected. Watching the outcomes unfold, Daniel's downfall, Evan's support, and her own growth, taught her that revenge, when built on truth and careful strategy, was more powerful than anger or shouting. There was satisfaction in seeing justice done quietly, without losing herself in bitterness or cruelty. The world did not need to witness her triumph for it to matter, the results spoke for themselves. Lena thought about the people who had been absent when she needed support, and she felt neither hate nor longing. Instead, she felt clarity. Life would always include betrayal, disappointment, and pain. What mattered was choosing what to carry forward and what to leave behind. She chose dignity, patience, and careful judgment. That choice had protected her, guided her, and opened doors she had never imagined. She also reflected on how resilience is built in quiet ways. She had learned to keep moving, even when the past felt heavy. She had learned to trust herself before trusting anyone else. She had learned that kindness does not make someone weak, it makes someone human, capable of deep understanding and connection. And when paired with caution and discernment, it becomes a force that changes outcomes in unexpected ways. Finally, Lena understood that she was not defined by loss, betrayal, or the people who tried to diminish her. She was defined by what she refused to become: bitter, dishonest, or small. She had chosen strength without losing compassion, wisdom without giving up hope, and patience without surrendering her standards. Looking forward, Lena felt steady, grounded, and ready for what came next. She knew life would continue to challenge her, but she also knew she had the tools, the experience, and the character to meet it. One small act of kindness had taught her the greatest lesson of all: integrity and truth endure, even when betrayal threatens everything else.